Let's dive into one of the most dramatic stories you'll ever hear, a kingdom-shattering civil war. This is a story about ambition, about betrayal, and, get this, a king who's forced to go to war against his own son. It's about a victory that ends up costing him pretty much everything.
So picture this. These are the words of a king. Right at the moment he's won. It's not a shout of triumph, but a cry of pure agony. So, what in the world could make a victorious king say something like that? Why would he wish for his own death? Well, that's what we're here to unpack.
Well, the root of all this pain was this impossible choice that King David was facing. His kingdom was under attack, and the guy leading the rebel army? It was his own beloved but very ambitious son, Absalom. So you've got this collision, right? His duty as a king versus his heart as a father.
And you can see this total split in his mind right here. On one hand, you have David the king. He's a tactical genius, right? He picks his best commanders, splits his army into 3 groups, and even stays behind in the city because he knows he's a strategic asset there. Smart. But then you have David the father. And just as the troops are marching out, he gives one command that basically undermines the whole war effort. He tells everyone, loud enough for the whole army to hear, spare Absalom.
You know, that one plea, it really sets the stage for a total tragedy. Look, the rebellion had to be stopped. There's no question about that. The kingdom depended on it. But the price for that victory, it was going to be a devastating personal loss for David. And it all starts on the battlefield.
So right off the bat, Absalom makes a huge mistake. He decides to fight in the forest of Ephraim. In this place, it's a total nightmare. We're talking swamps, deep pits, cliffs. It's a mess. For David's smaller, more experienced army, this was perfect. But for Absalom's bigger army, the forest itself became the real enemy.
And the numbers, they're just staggering. 20,000 men in a single day. These are countrymen fighting countrymen. And the really tragic part? The story says the forest actually killed more of Absalom's men than David's soldiers did.
And this brings us to Absalom's final moments, and it's so dramatic. So Absalom, who was famous for his long hair, is trying to escape on his mule when his hair gets tangled up in the branches of a huge tree, and he's just left there, dangling, helpless. A soldier finds him, and remembering the king's order, he just reports it. But his commander, Joab, he's a cold, hard pragmatist. He knows this rebellion isn't really over until Absalom is gone for good, so he completely ignores the king's direct order, marches right up to Absalom, and ends the war himself with 3 spears.
Now, for Joab, this was just business. It was what had to be done to save the kingdom. But when the news gets to David, oh man, the victory means nothing to him. All he hears is that his son is dead. And it completely breaks him.
And you have to understand, David's grief was about more than just losing a son. He was convinced this was payback, divine punishment for his own terrible sins from years ago. You know, the whole situation with Sheba and her husband, Uriah. He believed his own failures brought this tragedy down on everyone.
And who's the one who finally snaps David out of this? It's Joab. Yeah, the same guy who killed Absalom. He basically storms in and tells the king this brutal truth. He says, look, your public grieving, it's a political disaster. You're shaming the very army that just saved your neck. It was harsh, for sure, but it was the reality check David desperately needed.
And that rebuke from Joab, it worked. David realizes he has to stop being just a grieving father and start being a king again. So he has to push down his grief and start the incredibly tricky job of putting his broken kingdom back together.
And his first move is an absolute shocker. To try and heal the nation, he fires Joab, the guy who just won the war for him, but also disobeyed him. And then he offers the job of top commander to Amasa, the general who just led the entire rebel army against him. I mean, talk about a high-risk, high-reward strategy for reconciliation. So with that move made, he starts navigating this political minefield. There's this guy Shimei who curses him. David publicly forgives him, basically to keep the peace between the tribes. Then there's Mephibosheth, who stayed loyal. David shows him kindness. And Barzillai, who helped him when he was on the run, he gets rewarded. Every single one of these is a calculated move to try and get things back to normal.
But just when you think, okay, maybe this is going to work, it all blows up. Those old rivalries between the northern tribes of Israel and David's own tribe of Judah, they were never really fixed. And they just erupt all over again, kicking off a whole new rebellion.
And this new rebellion happens fast. It starts with an argument over David's return. A guy named Sheba seizes the moment, shouts, "We have no share in David," and boom, the northern tribes are in open revolt again. So David sends his new commander, Amasa, to shut it down. But Joab, who is definitely not over being fired, meets Amasa along the way and murders him in cold blood, taking back control of the army. And how does this new rebellion end? Not with a big battle. Instead, a wise woman brokers a deal with Joab. They throw Sheba's head over the wall, and the rebellion is over. Just like that.
So here's the crazy, ironic ending to all this. After all of David's plans for unity, after firing Joab and hiring his enemy, who's standing there at the end, back in charge of the entire army? Joab, the guy who defied the king, murdered his son, murdered his replacement, but hey, he gets results. Power is a complicated thing.
You know, this whole chaotic chapter of David's life, it just tells you so much about the brutal reality of power. It's about how your past actions cast these long shadows, and about the incredible personal price you pay for wearing a crown.
When you boil it all down, this story really teaches us a few timeless lessons. First, being a leader means you're constantly torn between your personal feelings and your public duty. It's a painful balancing act. Second, everything you do has consequences that can last for a very, very long time. And finally, it shows just how fragile unity can be. Old grudges, old wounds, they don't just disappear.
Which leaves us with one final big question. When your duty as a leader crashes head-on with your deepest personal desires, what is the true weight of a crown?